Okay, so this video is going to talk about part of section 2.1. Section 2.1 is on page 209. It's always a good idea to try to also open your book to page 209 and follow along. This section, we are going to review quadratic equations and the standard form of a quadratic equation. So let's start with that. Standard form of a quadratic. Okay, the standard form of a quadratic would be f of x equals a times h minus, or x minus h squared plus k. And each of these variables, a, h, and k, give me some form description about my graph. For example, from that I can tell that the vertex is at the point hk. Okay. I can also tell that the axis of symmetry because we're cutting a parabola in half, it would be a vertical line, so it's going to be x equals, and it would be x equals h. So if I were looking at a picture of this, I'm just going to sketch. There's my axes, and let's say I had a parabola. Okay, here would be the point HK, and then I would have a vertical dashed line to show my axis of symmetry, and the equation of that would be x is equal to h. Okay, so far hopefully this isn't anything new for what you have learned, okay? So we've kind of only talked about h and k in this standard form of a quadratic, but we also know something about that variable a. We know if a is greater than 0, that our parabola opens up. Okay, so this picture would have an a greater than 0. Okay. If a is less than 0, then it opens down. Okay, so up and down deals with a being positive or negative, but that's not the only thing that a tells us. A tells us either if this parabola is going to be a normal width, narrower, or wider. So if a equals 1, then it's going to be normal. Now, if a is equal to 1, typically it wouldn't even be written there, so keep that in mind. Okay. If a is between 0 and 1, then that makes it wider. Now, the reason why I wrote absolute value of a is because, remember, up here we talked about negative and positive. Here we're just talking about whether or not that number is between 0 and 1. We're not concerned about whether it's positive or negative. And then we have if the absolute value of a is greater than 1, that causes it to be narrow. So if it's between 0 and 1, that means it's going to be wider. Okay, so let's look at an example and see if you can identify these things. Let's say I give you f of x is equal to 1/2 x minus 2 squared plus 1. And the first thing you should do when you're doing problems like this is ask, is that an equation that is already in standard form? Because in a second, we're going to do some that are not in standard form. So is that in standard form? And we would see, if I go back up, we've got a here, x minus h plus k. So it is in standard form. So then I can go ahead and identify some things. And I would suggest when I make this list that you see if you can do this before I go through it. So the first thing you should be able to tell me is the vertex. Then the axis of symmetry. Then whether it's up or down. And then we would say normal, narrow, or wider. Okay, so you should be able to identify those 4 things no matter what equation of a parabola I give you. So let's start with the vertex. Remember, the vertex comes from H and K, which are these points here. So we would say that our vertex is at the point 2, 1. Now notice I didn't put -2 because it's in standard form, okay, and there's going to be a subtraction sign there. If you go back up to standard form, it's a subtraction sign. And then I said the vertex is just at H. I didn't say it was at -H, okay? Then the axis of symmetry, remember that should be an equation because we're talking about the equation of a line, and it was always x equals, and then it was x equals h. So our axis of symmetry is at x equals 2. Then I need to decide whether this opens up or down, and remember that comes from this variable, or excuse me, not variable, number in the front here. And for up or down, I'm just concerned about positive and negative, and it's a positive number. So I know that this opens up. Okay. For the last one, normal, narrow, or wider, I'm still concerned about this number that I circled in light blue, except now I want to think about whether it is a equal to 1, absolute value of a is between 0 and 1, or whether it's greater than 1. And we happen to have that second case where that is a number that's between 0 and 1. So we know that that's going to cause our graph to be wider. And from this description, I could either roughly sketch or pick out the graph for this equation. Okay, so this video was just talking about standard form of a quadratic. I'm going to make another video for you that is going to give you something that maybe isn't in standard form, and we're going to talk about how you write it in standard form.